Roughly 20 years after the First Crusade, 9 knights gathered in Jerusalem and established one of the most mysterious orders in history. Their aim was to ensure the safety of pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. They named themselves Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ. However, they soon became known as the Knights Templar, the name we recognize them by today. They were one of the most powerful orders in history, reaching an incredible level of wealth shortly after their establishment, to the extent of lending money to renowned European kings. In this video, we will witness how they acquired this power. We will trace the footsteps of the Templars from Jerusalem to Europe and uncover the historical truths behind the rapid rise of this order. After the capture of Jerusalem by the Crusaders on July 15, 1099, concluding the First Crusade, 4 separate Crusader states emerged in the Middle East: the County of Edessa, the Principality of Antioch, the County of Tripoli, and the Kingdom of Jerusalem. However, these newly emerging political structures in the region were militarily fragile, and even years after the establishment of the Latin kingdoms, internal stability could not be fully achieved. After the capture of the city, some of the Muslims in the region settled on the hills around Jerusalem and in nearby caves. Over time, this situation became a significant problem for the Kingdom of Jerusalem. The routes used by Christian pilgrims, such as the routes from Jaffa to Jerusalem and Jericho to Jerusalem, were frequently subjected to attacks by these Muslims. As a solution, several orders were established during this period to protect pilgrims and meet their various needs. Among them, the Holy Sepulchre Knights, which soon disbanded after its establishment, and the Hospitaller Knights, who welcomed pilgrims and took care of their health, were notable. However, these 2 orders proved inadequate in ensuring the safety of pilgrims, and by around 1120, attacks by Muslims on the pilgrimage routes had increased significantly. It was during this period that 2 knights, Hugh de Payens and Godfrey de Saint-Omer, appeared before King Baldwin II of Jerusalem during the Council of Nablus in 1120, proposing the establishment of a new order. The proposal received support from Jerusalem Patriarch Warmund. Thus, this new order was officially established with the approval of the king in 1120, and they called themselves the Paupers Camilitones Christi, meaning Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ. However, this name was limited to official documents and a few historical records. King Baldwin had allocated a part of his residence, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, to the Knights. Christians believed that the Al-Aqsa Mosque was built on the site of the ancient Temple of Solomon, which is why, shortly after its establishment, the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ began to be called the Knights Templar, in reference to their first residence in Jerusalem. The order was built on 3 fundamental principles: poverty, chastity, and obedience. However, the most important among them was the principle of poverty, which was emphasized in the order's name. The image you see, depicting 2 knights on a horse, is one of the early symbols of the Knights Templar, symbolizing their poverty and simple lifestyle. Were the Knights Templar truly that poor? Answering this question is quite challenging because much about the period of their establishment remains a mystery. For instance, most sources mention 9 founding members but provide only 8 names: Hugh de Payens, Godfrey de Estiomar, Payen de Montdidier, Archambaud de Saint-Amand, André de Montbard, Geoffrey Bison, Rossel, and Gondomer. Many of their pasts have been lost to the dusty pages of history. Therefore, it is not possible to determine whether they were poor in their pre-order lives or why they adopted the principle of poverty after the establishment of the order. However, it doesn't seem logical for a few ordinary men to propose the establishment of a new order before the King of Jerusalem. Historians suggest that the emphasis on the principle of poverty by the Knights was intended to gain sympathy and support from poor Christians and to pave the way for future donations to the order. Nevertheless, some historians claim that, even if this emphasis on poverty was a strategic move initially, the Knights were genuinely committed to the principle of poverty in the early years of the order. However, even if this claim were true, the commitment of the Templars to poverty would not last for a long time. This is because, within a few years of the establishment of the order, they would experience an unprecedented rise, bringing immense wealth to the poor fellow soldiers of Christ. Several factors played a role in the rapid ascent of the two Templar Knights. The intellectual background and worldly mission of the order were developed by Bernard, the abbot of Clearview Monastery, one of the most famous clergy of the time. Thanks to his efforts, the Templars quickly became a recognized order throughout Europe. Simultaneously, the first Grand Master of the organization, Hugh de Payens, began to climb the career ladder rapidly. He was an ambitious and intelligent man with a dynamic character. He developed close relationships with King Baldwin and the Patriarch in a short period. In 1127, he was sent to Europe on a diplomatic mission on behalf of King Baldwin. This mission would change the destiny of the Templars forever. During his stay in Europe, Hugh de Payens had the opportunity to meet many nobles, including kings and numerous clergymen. He traveled as far as Britain, establishing Templar houses in London and Edinburgh. Finally, when he returned to Jerusalem, he brought with him 300 well-trained and fully equipped knights to participate in a new campaign against Muslims. The Templars reaped the fruits of these activities at the Council of Troyes in 1129. With this council, the official recognition of the Knights Templar by the papacy accelerated the rapid ascent of the organization in its early years. In 1130, Bernard, the abbot of Clearview Monastery, published a treatise titled In Praise of the New Knighthood, outlining the internal regulations of the Templars. After approximately 20 years from the First Crusade, 9 knights gathered in Jerusalem and founded one of the most mysterious orders in history. Their goal was to ensure the safety of pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land, and they named themselves the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ. However, shortly thereafter, they became known as the Knights Templar, the name we recognize them by today. They became one of the most powerful orders in history, achieving incredible wealth shortly after their establishment to the extent that they could lend money to Europe's famous kings. In this video, we will explore how they attained such power. We will trace the footsteps of the Templars from Jerusalem to Europe and uncover the historical truths behind the rapid rise of this order. The First Crusade, which concluded with the capture of Jerusalem by the Crusaders on July 15, 1099, resulted in the emergence of 4 separate Crusader states in the Middle East: the County of Edessa, the Principality of Antioch, the County of Tripoli, and the Kingdom of Jerusalem. However, the political structure in the region was fragile and faced military challenges, and even years after the establishment of the Latin kingdoms, internal stability was not fully achieved. After the capture of the city, some Muslims in the region settled in the hills around Jerusalem and nearby caves, posing a significant problem for the Kingdom of Jerusalem. The routes from Jaffa to Jerusalem and Jericho to Jerusalem, commonly used by Christian pilgrims, were frequently subjected to attacks by these Muslims. As a solution to this issue, several orders were established during this period to protect and address the needs of pilgrims. Among these, the Holy Sepulchre Knights, which disbanded shortly after its founding, and the Hospitalier Knights, responsible for receiving and attending to the health of pilgrims, were notable. However, these 2 orders proved inadequate in ensuring the safety of pilgrims, and by around 1120, attacks by Muslims on the pilgrimage routes had increased significantly. It was during this time that 2 knights, Hugh de Payens and Godfrey de Saint-Omer, proposed the establishment of a new order during the Council of Nablus in 1120, appearing before King Baldwin II of Jerusalem. The proposal received support from Patriarch Warmund, leading to the formal establishment of the new order with the king's approval in 1120. They named themselves Paupers Camilitones Christi, or the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ. However, this name remained limited to official documents and a few historical records. King Baldwin had allocated a portion of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, his residence, to the Knights. Christians believed that the Al-Aqsa Mosque was built on the site of the ancient Temple of Solomon, which is why, shortly after its founding, the poor fellow soldiers of Christ began to be called the Knights Templar in reference to their first residence in Jerusalem. The order was based on three fundamental principles: poverty, chastity, and obedience. Among these, poverty, reflected in the symbol of two knights on a horse, was considered the most important. This symbol represented the poverty and simple lifestyle of the order. Whether the Templars were truly poor during their early years is challenging to determine due to the lack of comprehensive information about the period of their founding. Many sources mention 9 founding members, but only 8 names are provided, including Hugh de Payens, Godfrey de Estiomar, Payen de Montdidier, Archambaud de Saint-Amand, André de Montbard, Geoffrey Bison, and 2 knights named Rossel and Gondomer. The past of many of these individuals has been lost to history, making it difficult to ascertain whether they were poor before the establishment of the order or adopted the principle of poverty afterward. Some historians argue that the emphasis on poverty was a strategic move to gain sympathy and support from poor Christians and pave the way for future donations to the order. However, there are also historians who claim that the knights were genuinely committed to the principle of poverty in the early years of the order. Regardless, their commitment to poverty did not last long. After its establishment, the order experienced an incredible rise in wealth within a few years, and by doing so, the poor fellow soldiers of Christ became immensely wealthy. Several factors played a role in the rapid rise of the 2 Templar Knights. The intellectual background and worldly mission of the order were developed by Bernard, the head abbot of the Clearview Monastery, one of the most famous religious figures of the time. Due to his efforts, the Templars quickly became a recognized order throughout Europe. Concurrently, the first Grand Master of the organization, Hugh de Payens, swiftly climbed the career ladder. He was ambitious and intelligent, developing close relationships with King Baldwin and the Patriarch of Jerusalem. In 1127, he was sent to Europe for a diplomatic mission on behalf of King Baldwin. This mission dramatically changed the fate of the Templars. During his stay in Europe, Hugh de Payens had the opportunity to meet numerous nobles, including kings, and collected substantial donations on behalf of the Templars. He established Templar houses in London and Edinburgh and, upon his return to Jerusalem, brought back 300 well-trained and fully equipped knights to participate in a new campaign against Muslims. The Templars reaped the rewards of their activities during the Council of Troyes in 1129. This council officially recognized the Templars by the papacy, facilitating the rapid ascent of the organization during its formative years. In 1130, Bernard, the head abbot of Clearview Monastery, published a treatise called In Praise of the New Knighthood, outlining the internal regulations of the Templars. From this point onward, the Templars began to establish an extensive bureaucratic network in Europe, particularly in France and England. In a short period, the number of knights exceeded 300, while the number of individuals working behind the scenes for the organization was even greater. Thanks to the efforts of the Council of Troyes and Bernard, the Knights Templar became the official representatives of the Holy War ideology initiated by the papacy's call for the Crusade. However, their real power would come from the charters issued thereafter. Between 1133 and 1151, the papacy issued a total of 26 charters supporting the Templars. Many of these charters granted various privileges that could be considered reasonable for the order. However, the charter named Omni Datum Optimum, issued by Pope Innocent II in 1139, bestowed immense power upon the Templars. This charter placed the Templars under the protection of the papacy and provided the order with significant privileges. These privileges included exemption from church taxes, the right to collect taxes from their own communities, unconditional possession of loot acquired in wars against Muslims, exemption from all church trials in Europe and the East, and independence from any secular authority. As a result, The Templars had the freedom to act as an autonomous state under papal protection in many regions affiliated with the Catholic Church for the next 2 centuries. The next step after this stage was institutionalization. The organization needed to establish a solid foundation for its material and spiritual power to further increase its wealth. To achieve this, Templar houses were constructed in both the West and the East. Through this expansion, the Templars quickly formed a vast network covering all of Europe and the Crusader kingdoms. Templar houses consisted of multiple buildings constructed close to each other on a piece of land. They were often built in important cities, strategic regions, or along trade routes, serving multiple functions. During the mobilization period, the primary purpose of these houses was to provide financial and logistical support to the Crusaders, supplying them with money, weapons, horses, and food. Additionally, the Templars played essential roles in banking systems and facilitating the transfer of pilgrims to the Holy Land. They cultivated their lands, engaged in the import and export of certain goods, propagated the ideology of the order, and trained new soldiers to fight on behalf of the Catholic Church. In short, the entire organization of the Templars revolved around these houses. Members of the order residing in these houses cultivated their lands, producing various products such as wool, ceramics, meat, and wine to generate income for the order. They also collected taxes from peasants and farmers living under their control. However, these revenues represented only a small portion of the overall income. The wealth of the Templars largely depended on the loot obtained from wars, donations from European wealthy nobles to the order, and a well-organized banking system. Following the Council of Troyes in 1129, the Templars transformed into the elite forces and professional armies of the Crusades. Especially from the Second Crusade onward, they actively participated in a significant portion of the campaigns. This involvement brought about a substantial increase in income. Almost all the spoils obtained from wars against Muslims flowed into the coffers of the Templars. Additionally, they earned profits from the logistical services they provided during campaigns. Another significant source of income for the order was donations from European wealthy nobles. According to the Syriac historian Michael, knights joining the Templars were required to donate their entire wealth to the order. This method quickly led the Templars to amass considerable wealth shortly after their establishment. However, the donations collected were not limited to this. Before the Council of Troyes, the order received 21 different donations from European kings and queens. With the official recognition of the organization by the papacy through the council, the amount of donations from outside the order increased significantly. Between 1120 and 1129, the Templars collected only 21 donations, but from 1129 to 1150, they amassed more than 600 donations. These included portable assets such as gold, silver, weapons, and horses. Additionally, they received a considerable amount of land and real estate, some of which they used for themselves while renting out others. This way, they generated income from every property under their control. The Templars' primary purpose for establishing was to protect the pilgrimage routes in the Holy Land. In the early years of the order, their operational areas were generally limited to the Latin kingdoms. They transported pilgrims from port cities like Acre, Jaffa, and Arsuf to inland pilgrimage centers, especially Jerusalem. However, as the order grew, the scope of their protection expanded. By the mid-12th century, the Templars had a vast operational area covering many countries in Europe. Pilgrims departing from various regions of Europe would pass through routes protected by the Templars, stay in Templar houses, set sail on Templar ships, and visit pilgrimage centers under the protection of the order. Nevertheless, this journey was long, arduous, and perilous. Pilgrimage routes were filled with groups attempting to ambush pilgrims to steal their valuable belongings and money. Aware of these dangers due to their line of work, the Templars eventually developed a banking system to secure the wealth of pilgrims. According to this system, pilgrims departing from Europe would entrust their money and valuable belongings to the nearest Templar branch. In return, they received a document specifying the amount of money they delivered to the Templar house and providing their personal information. Upon reaching their destination, such as Jerusalem, pilgrims would present this document to the Templar branch in the city and receive a payment corresponding to the amount they had deposited in Europe. Naturally, both Templar houses took a commission during this process. Initially, the system had a simple infrastructure aimed at safely delivering pilgrims' money to pilgrimage centers. However, over time, the Templars further developed their commercial activities in this field and, taking advantage of Islamic economics, established a primitive version of the modern banking system. By the late 12th century, they were providing services such as granting credit to countries and individuals, paying retirement pensions, supplying taxes, and conducting transfer transactions, resembling many services found in today's banking sector. After each transaction, the Templar member conducting the transaction and the customer received a receipt indicating the names of the parties involved, the date of the transaction, and the transaction amount. For example, receipts from transactions in 1295 to 1296 feature the names of Templar members such as Baldwinus, Johannes, Martinus, and Rennerus. Thanks to their banking activities, the Templars quickly became an international financial institution that met the cash needs of European kings, clergy, and nobles. The order, founded by 9 knights around the year 1120, had surpassed 20,000 members by the mid-12th century. Their fleet had grown to compete with maritime republics like Venice and Genoa. Now, the Templars were providing credit to Europe's famous kings and nobles, seizing their assets in case of non-payment. This occasionally gave them the chance to intervene in the internal affairs of countries. Established as the poor soldiers of Christ, the Templars became the richest organization in Europe within about 20 years of their founding. This rise led to the association of mysterious treasure stories, such as the Holy Grail and the Shroud of Turin, with the Templars. However, proving these associations historically seems challenging, and many claims remain at the level of conspiracy theories. Nevertheless, historical records indicate that the wealth of the Templars was acquired through the methods mentioned in the video: donations, loot, banking, and commercial activities. In conclusion, the rise of the Knights Templar was rapid and remarkable. Similarly, their fall was unexpected. However, we plan to delve into this topic and the military structure of the order more thoroughly in another video. If you would like the series to continue, please let us know in the comments. Until the next video,